Hello and welcome to Modifications or Shaping for Crochet Garments. Now I know shaping is often seen as a bit of a scary subject. It can be a bit overwhelming, especially if you've never tried it. So I'm going to do my best today to briefly explain the foundation behind getting a good fit and also to walk through how to work out shaping with some simple examples. But the great thing is that crochet is really stretchy. So I'm also going to give you a couple of my favorite hacks to try so that we can get a better fit without all the maths. So as I said, I am going to try and keep it brief today, but it is kind of a detailed subject. So I want to cover 3 main points today. And so that's why, what's the point of adding shaping, when specific shaping is needed, or maybe when we can use some alternatives, and then lastly, how specifically to calculate shaping. So for that section, you might want to grab a pen or paper, or you can follow along with the PDF. And then hopefully by the end of this, you'll all have a pretty good foundation of how to modify crochet garments to get your desired fit. Now that's absolutely not to say that basic or simple shapes don't fit. Bodies come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and so too does personal style. So while there will be a lot of makers who have found that a simple boxy shape is absolutely perfect for what you want, there might be just as many of us who have struggled with fit issues. And ultimately, the goal with making our own clothes is that we feel comfortable and confident when we wear them, right? So hopefully some of the things that we're going to go over today could make all the difference as to whether you enjoy wearing your makes or not. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Michelle and I'm the designer and technical editor at Tales of Knots. For the moment, I'm focusing more on creating my own patterns, but I've noticed that there aren't many resources specifically for crocheters on how to make modifications. So with the knowledge I have in the technical side, I really want to be able to share that with other crocheters. So let's get into the detail. So firstly, why might we want to add shaping? This can be a bit of a misunderstood topic sometimes. So I just want to make something really clear that when I'm talking about adding shaping, I'm not focusing on how clothes look on us. That's completely dependent on our own personal style. It's a personal preference. So changing something that's form-fitting to oversized or vice versa is not what we're talking about. So when we talk about how we can benefit from adding shaping, we're actually talking about how clothes feel on our bodies. We want to be comfortable when we're wearing something. So the purpose of adding in shaping is simply to allow our clothes to move as our bodies move. So if your clothes don't move when you move, it can feel really restricting, really uncomfortable. And also when somebody's constantly tugging on their clothes, it's really noticeable that they're not comfortable in what they're wearing. So if we take as an example somebody with a larger bust, let's say I prefer oversized styles and patterns, it might fit my full bust, but then I'll end up with extra folds of fabric at the underarms. Or on the other hand, let's say I prefer something that's more form-fitting, and then when I put my arms up, the top rides up and it gets sort of stuck and I have to, tug it back down and mess with it a bit. So we're not trying to change the style of the pattern we're making. What we're trying to do is to add movement to our garments so that we're not spending all of our time adjusting our clothes. Okay, so when? Now, I might be slightly paraphrasing that quote, but it is a good question because although I've just talked about how we want our garments to move with us, adding shaping isn't always required. So how do we know if we need to add it or not? In order to work that out, we first need to look at the style of pattern we're making and what size we're choosing. Mostly, women are advised to use their full bust measurement to determine which size to make. But is that really the best measurement to use? Because unfortunately, it can lead to a couple of issues that we might encounter. So the first one is that it assumes the bust is the largest measurement, and that may not be the case for your body shape. If your hips or your tummy is your largest measurement, then what size to make might come down to your pattern choice. So if your chosen pattern is straight up and down, then you may want to choose your size based on what is your largest measurement and then use decreases to reduce any fabric at the top. Alternatively, you can choose your size to better fit your bust, but then add some increases as you get further down to accommodate the hips or waist. If you choose a pattern, however, that's already an A-line shape or a peplum, they both flare out at the sides, so you may not need to make any adjustments. So sometimes simply choosing a pattern that more closely follows your own body shape is going to determine which is the best measurement to use and whether or not you then need to make any modifications on top of that. So if our bust is our largest measurement, then we need to look at the second issue with using full bust measurement to determine the size we're making, and that is that the full bust, which is measured around the apex, so your nipple line, that's not a good indicator of what our frame measures. Our bone structure underneath doesn't really change once we're fully grown. So if I gain weight or lose weight, my shoulders are going to stay the same width, the length of my arms isn't going to change. It's generally proportional to each other. But these softer parts on top, which would include the bust, that can be any size. Therefore, that measurement is not proportional to the rest of the body. So here's a visual example of that. These two people have the same full chest measurement, but you can see one is taller and broader with a smaller bust, and then the other one is more petite with a larger bust. So just having a different bra size means that the rest of their proportions can be really quite different to each other. So of course the question we have then is that if the bra size makes such a big difference, how do we know which size the designer used? Is it going to fit the person on the left or the person on the right? Now the designer might specifically tell us this, but if they don't say otherwise, we can probably assume that they followed Craft Yarn Council. And it's a good resource for various body measurements. However, it's not perfect, especially if you have a larger bust, because it's based on averages. And so the average that Craft Yarn Council has used for the chest circumference is a B pattern cup size. Now I say pattern cup size because that's actually slightly different to a bra size. Bra sizes use the difference between your full bust and your under bust, while a pattern cup size is the difference between your full bust and your upper bust, which is sometimes called the high bust. So if your full bust is 1 inch bigger than your upper bust, that would be an A cup. If your full bust is 2 inches bigger, then it's a B cup, so on. So for me, my full bust is 7 inches bigger than my upper bust. That makes me an F pattern cup. So most patterns are written then using a difference of 2 inches between the upper bust and the full bust. So if I have a bigger difference than 2 inches, it kind of sounds like it would make sense to just make a larger size, but it's actually the opposite. And unfortunately, this is the number one mistake that I see people with a larger bust make. The larger your bra size, the smaller the pattern size you should be making. And I know that that does not sound quite right. So let's walk through it, and we're going to look at the body shape on the right. So the larger your pattern cup size, so the bigger the difference, the more likely it is that the rest of your measurements are smaller than Craft Yarn Council's ranges for that chest circumference. So if you match the chest circumference for a size extra large, but you're an F pattern cup, you're more likely to have a smaller rib cage, narrower shoulders, smaller upper arms, and so on. And so the number one place that makes a handmade sweater look ill-fitting is the neckline and the shoulders. So for the figure on the right here, a smaller size is going to be a better match to all the other measurements. Now I don't know if you can all spot the extra issue that people with a larger bust often have, and that's the increased distance from the underarm to the bust apex. Rightly or wrongly, this is a whole separate topic, sweater designs often reach the stated full bust measurement at the same time as the split for the sleeves. Now, I don't know about you, my nipples are not in line with my underarm, and I fall more into the body shape on the right. So if you are a B cup, your underarms and your bust apex might not be that far apart lengthwise. But for me, unfortunately, that's not the case. And the sad truth is that the older I get, the further south they're likely to migrate. So even if my actual chest circumference measurement doesn't change, that distance can. So it's not only people with a larger bust who may experience fit issues here, but also the older we get, because the further the distance is going to be between the underarm and the bust apex. So if we are choosing a pattern size based on a full bust circumference, and the pattern is reaching that circumference at the underarms, then if we have a larger bust, the more likely it is that we're going to have extra fabric and fit issues up here. So I mentioned that a smaller size will be a better fit for our other measurements, but then which size, and is there a measurement we can use to help us choose the right size? So you might have guessed it already, but the better indicator for our frame, if you have a larger bust, is the upper bust measurement. So our full bust measurement is here at the apex where our nipple line is, and then the upper bust is where our bust begins, so it's just underneath the underarms. So if you use your upper bust as the measurement to base yourself on, then you're going to be following a more accurate proportional pattern size for the rest of our body. And then determining whether we need to add extra width at the bust comes down to how much ease the pattern has. So ease is just the difference between our body measurements and the finished measurements of the item. So if the item is bigger than our body, like an oversized sweater, it has positive ease. And then if the item is smaller than our body and it's supposed to stretch over it to fit like a hat, then that's negative ease. And what we need to remember is that we don't need the full amount of ease at the full bust. We can actually even have some negative ease at the bust, and we would still have a sweater that fits well because crochet stretches. But standard positive ease for a comfortable fit is usually 2 to 4 inches. And that's the amount of ease that we want around the shoulders and arms, the neckline. And you can see that that still fits the larger bust, like the example on the left. But if you were to add that amount of positive ease to our full bust measurement, which is currently how we're advised to choose our size, like on the right, then the item is going to be a lot baggier. We're going to have a lot of extra fabric here above the bust that we don't need and that we're going to then have to remove. So for patterns with standard positive ease, a smaller size based off your upper bust is actually going to give you a better fit overall and possibly still have enough room to accommodate your bust size without having to make any modifications. You can always double check that using the pattern's schematics, and that will show you the finished measurements of the item you're making. One thing we do need to note though is that the more you're asking an item to stretch in one direction, the less it's going to stretch in the other direction. So we might still need to add length, even if we don't need to add width. And of course, if our pattern has negative ease, or you still don't think it has enough positive ease to fit, then we're going to want to look at making some modifications.